Kuwait. He was trying to get extra access to water so he could ship his oil out, and also he was wanting to take over this little tiny country of Kuwait because they had massive amounts of oil. But I never will forget this. I'd never heard of them before, but they showed a little thing to answer the question, who is Saddam Hussein? And they showed a lot of children that he had killed by gassing, and they were Kurds. And I'm like, well, why in the world are they attacking the Kurds? It's because the Kurds want their own nation, and because the territory in Iraq that they control has a lot of oil. And so they don't want to give them the freedom because it'd be allowing... It's not all religious, okay? But the idea of Muslim fighting Muslim is totally against the Quran, sectarianism. And that's a word, if you're a member of the Church of Christ and you're over the age of 50, most likely you used to hear the word, the evils of sectarianism. And that means dividing up into sects. And when Churches of Christ used it, we changed that term to the evils of denominationalism, which is to divide up by name and by doctrine, and how that wasn't supposed to be the way Christianity is, and it's not supposed to be divided up as it is. But when you read about sectarian violence, you are talking about the different factions within Islam. But again, I come back to it. When we look at the Arab world, and see, I just used the wrong word there. When we talk about the Muslim world, a lot of the fighting is ethnic-based fighting. There's just a natural divide between Iran and Iraq. I don't know that we understood why Iran and Iraq fought for 10 years and lost over 1 million people apiece. We look at them and say, well, they're all Arabs. Well, that'd be wrong. The Iranians are Persian. And then you throw into that the mix that Iran is Shia Muslim for the most part, and Iraq was being ruled by a Sunni leader, and they constantly persecuted the Shiites that were living in Iraq. And I'm sorry I'm getting ahead of myself because I need to go explain who these people are. Europe is in trouble because of Islam. How did Europe get in trouble? The same way the United States has got itself in trouble. I sat in the meeting the other day at the Signature Nursing Home, and one of the big problems is finding people to work. There are jobs to be had. Now, they may not be cushy, easy jobs, but there's always jobs to be had. There's always a big turnover in nursing home industry anyway because of the very nature of the work. But in the talk, they were talking about how if you look at the workforce, most of the people in the workforce seem to be above 40, and there's a whole bunch of young people not working. It's not because there's not jobs. Part of it is because we got a bunch of spoiled young people who don't want to work. I didn't say all of them. I said some of them don't want to work. They want to work smart, not hard. And I found out what that really means is they just don't work. But what happened? I was talking to my buddy in Oklahoma yesterday, and we were talking farming, and I don't know, most of you don't care about this, but I miss the days of when the hay was put up in the square bales. Now that takes a whole lot of work to put that kind of hay up. It also takes storage, but I just hate to see these round bales and all of the waste that there is to it. Because the cow will go out there and they're going to walk on a third of it or more, and that just tears me up. And my buddy reminded me of a major problem. He said, are you going to be able to find a crew of 4 teenagers that's going to help you haul hay? And the answer to that is no. Now, I don't know why we quit having big families. We don't want, where our kids are involved in so many things that a lot of them are not working. I'm talking to a group of people whose most of their teenage kids have a job here, but you've got a bunch of kids that won't work, and so who brought the Hispanics, buddy? I'm looking at you, because if there was ever a town that went against its history, it would be Lafayette. Who brought in the Hispanic population around here? Tobacco farmers in particular. Now, the massive amount of Hispanics came here because of a natural disaster in the Bowling Green area. What was that? That hailstorm and all of the roofers. You can't hardly find a roofer. Why did that happen? It's because Hispanics are doing jobs that we don't want to do anymore. You can't find people to do it. Or at least that's what's said, and I think there's truth. Some truth to that. You go to the oil industry out. Now, I don't know about the fracking field, but I don't know why it would be different. But you go out in West Texas and the areas where they're drilling oil. Used to, people from this area would go out there and work because you could make big bucks per hour. You ever hear anybody from here going out there to work now to make big bucks? No. You can't hardly find an English-speaking person on an oil well anymore. Why? To be perfectly honest, white people didn't want to do those jobs anymore. Well, in Europe, they're more anti-kids than we are. And so you have this graying population and nobody to do a lot of the work. So their connections, based on the form of colonialism, is in Africa. And so they're bringing in African workers to Europe who are Muslim. And this one drives me insane. I pick on them all the time. But the French thinks everybody in the world wants to be French. But they bring all of these Muslims in here who are very, very, very conservative Muslims. They don't want to be French. They want France to be Muslim. And they just don't, the French government has had a tough time figuring that out. They think they're going to come in here, they're going to integrate, they're going to like our ways so much they're going to adapt. No, they're not going to adapt to them. They remain isolated in those countries. And then you've got problems of them coming in, and France is just one example. You've got problems of massive migration of Muslims, conservative, a lot of them radical, into these countries, and there's not jobs. So now you've gone from needing cheap workers to people, and especially under the socialist governments, people who are on basically welfare. And here's the way this works. If I was a Muslim from Africa and I moved to Denmark and I got a job there and I got to be a citizen, I can leave all of my wives and children back home and they draw a check from the government. Because obviously the salary that I'm making is not enough to keep up all of my wives and children. And it's creating major hardship. Everybody here is aware of the news enough to know that Greece is on the brink of just absolutely going totally belly up as a nation. Why? A lot of welfare and more immigrants than they could ever hope to support. And so we look at Greece and we say, boy, they must handle finances terribly. They're in the news every year or two about going bankrupt. They've been overrun with Muslims and poor Muslims. Now, I've said all of that and hadn't really taught you anything about Islam. I do want you to kind of understand the complexities of the world around us, and especially to do with the Muslims. But I want to go back and lay the foundation. I'll try to be more systematic. I've already gone over this, but just for the sake of doing it again, Muhammad is born 570 A.D. He dies at 632. His first wife was a wealthy widow whom he had worked for as a caravan leader. Even though she's already in her early 40s and even late 40s, she starts having children by Muhammad, and only two survive, and they were girls. I'm pretty sure it's only two. But she becomes his first convert. And then some of the slaves in the community began to believe what he was teaching. He goes, let me back up, 570, it's 610 AD, he starts going to a cave and meditating and supposedly receiving the message of the Quran. And he starts speaking it to his disciples, and supposedly they committed it all to memory. And then after he dies, they start writing it down. Well, he's preaching against idolatry in Mecca. Well, the people run him out of town. He goes up to Medina, lives there for a while. As I said, he becomes the leader of Medina and actually some villages around there. He's the religious political leader. The only group that didn't accept him as a prophet were Jews, and that's going to lead to age-old conflict between Islam and the Jews. Now, Mecca is not satisfied with leaving him alone. They go up and they attack and they almost kill him, but they win the battle anyway. Finally, there's a big battle and Muhammad wins, and Muhammad and his followers subdue Mecca. So now you've got the two biggest cities around that submit to Islam. Then they turn to basically what's left of the population, and that's Bedouin. And they basically force the Bedouin into becoming Muslim. Now, as soon as Muhammad dies, the Bedouin says, we're not following that anymore. And the fellow that succeeds Muhammad basically beats them into submission and brings them back into the fold. So you've got a religion that is started not necessarily because of Muhammad wanting to fight, but it starts with strife, and that Muhammad and his followers have to leave for their own safety. Then they're attacked when they're set up. So it's not that they were necessarily the aggressor at all, but they finally fight back, they win, and then they do use some force against the Bedouin, and Muhammad dies. From that point on, everybody that's going to follow him, at least for several hundred years, are going to spread Islam by warfare. They call it the religion of peace. That means nothing to me. I don't try to be disrespectful to Muslims, but it's not a religion of peace. Everything about it speaks against that. I've got the Quran with me here this morning, and I marked several pages, and if I thought I could just see this one statement real quickly. I don't see it, and I'm not going to stand up here and flip and not be able to find it, but it had to do with their relationship with Christians. I'll find it later. Now, by the time Muhammad dies, supposedly he preaches his last sermon in Mecca to about 100,000 people, and he stresses the unity of the Muslim community. He goes back to Medina and dies. So that's his last sermon. Now, the only miracle that Muhammad ever claimed, or his followers ever claimed, was the production of this book called the Quran. They say this is the most perfect book ever given to man. And if I were in a Muslim country and a Muslim were to see me do this, that's a death penalty. Nothing is supposed to be laid on top of it. If you're in a Muslim country and I'm talking about a strict Muslim country, and you take the Quran and you take the Bible, and you say, well, let's just see which one. Let's see how they stack up. That's a death penalty. Okay, so that's really frustrating, isn't it? How do you convert somebody? Or why does a religion feel such a need to protect itself using violent forces? I mean, that's bothersome to me. If you have truth, why do you have to kill people? Or why do you threaten to kill people if they walk off from it? And here's something that I found, and this is not something that I'm making up. There are a lot of Muslims that, let me back up. There are a lot of people in the Muslim world that are atheists, but they don't kill them. But if they were to convert to Christianity or Judaism or any religion, they put them to death. So it's okay to stop believing in God. I hope we have a little one in here. I hope it's not okay. You're supposed to believe in God always. I'm talking about people, okay? Angie, please make sure I was clear on that. I don't want this young lady to go out saying the preacher said it's okay not to believe in God. I'm saying in the Muslim world, they will tolerate an atheist. But somebody that converts to another religion, they put to death. That doesn't make sense, does it? There's a lot of inconsistencies going on there. Well, the Quran is it's about the size of the New Testament. It's divided up into surahs, which is another word for a chapter. And I invite you, and I told you, you can go and read one online, and I think that you ought to, just to sort of familiarize yourself with it. And you're going to find it extremely, extremely difficult to read or get anything out of. But then there's statements like this, and this is a good takeoff point. In Surah 66, and basically what is verse 9, O Prophet, make war on the infidels and hypocrites and deal rigorously with them. Hell shall be their abode, and wretched the passage to it. So does Islam teach warfare on people that are non-Muslim? And it sounds that way to a lot of them too, because, but you know, we in the churches of Christ, and I don't know that we're doing as good a job, and I say we, I should say me. We've always taught the way to read the Bible is, first of all, who is speaking, right? Who is speaking? And who is being spoken to? The other day at the nursing home, I was looking at Matthew 24, which is a pretty tough chapter to go through in a nursing home. But I said, Jesus says, all of these things will come to pass before this generation passes away. Now we know, if you've dealt with other people from different denominations, preachers always read that, and people always read this generation as our time. See, it's right there in the Bible. Before this generation passes away, this is going to happen, and so they make it about us. But who is, when it says, Jesus says, but until this generation passes, all these things will happen before this generation passes away. Who's he talking to? He's talking to the people that's right there in front of him. Now, a radical Muslim reads this, and here's what they hear. Make war on infidels and hypocrites. A Muslim scholar hears it all, in which it says, O Prophet, make war with the infidels and hypocrites. So who's supposed to make war? Muhammad. And a Muslim scholar, and we have to recognize this, we've got to be careful that we don't generalize, even though I do some in here. We don't generalize and say all Muslims believe this. No. not all Muslims believe that they're supposed to be out blowing other people up. They read this as this is a command of Allah to Muhammad when the people from Mecca are attacking him. So it has a specific time, a specific fulfillment. It's not for every crazy person to grab it and say, it says make war on the infidel, so let's do it. Now, who are the infidels? Anybody that's not a Muslim. Unless you're a really radical Muslim and you decide anybody that's not as conservative as you are is an infidel. We don't see anything like that in Christianity at all, do we? Yes, we do. I bought a church directory one time in Athens, Alabama, bookstore down there. I thought we had more churches, and they had a little old bitty book. Somebody's shaking their head. They know what I'm talking about. I'm coming home. I'm riding with one of the elders. I'm coming home. I'm flipping through. I think, man, it's a pretty poor directory. I said, my hometown has two pretty good churches in town and one right outside of town. I said, the only church they got mentioned in Pulaski is one's got about 40 members. Yeah, Chad's shaking his head too. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about now, right? It was a directory of the faithful, non-institutional churches that we grew up calling them antis. They wouldn't put us in their book. Why? Because we eat in the building. We're infidels. Amanda Cushman, some of y'all heard this story. Amanda Cushman was at Buckhead Cafe, whatever the thing's called, and she's up and she stops and talks to this nice couple, and she's complimenting them on how they look so sweet together, and ask how long they've been married, and she's really bragging on them. And she says, and we're having friends and family day at our church tomorrow, and I'd love to invite you to come. And the woman says, do you eat in the building? And Amanda says, yes, that's what we're going to do tomorrow. And the lady gets her Bible out. She says, let me show you where you should not be doing this. So we do some of the same stuff, we just don't blow each other up. We write each other out. We don't fellowship with each other. So thankfully, at least we don't blow each other up. Now, the interesting thing to me is, and you read the Quran, you don't get, I've told you this, you don't get much of anything except for judgment, 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 judgment. It talks about the 99 names of God, and it doesn't give you but 3 or 4 of the names of God. It says there's 124,000 prophets. It only mentions 25 of them, and you really don't get the story behind them. So I look at it and I say, it's not much of a miracle from a literary point of view. But this is it. They say this is the most perfect book. But then you have to go to all these other sources to figure it out. Now, I told you something about this book in particular last week. What about the language of it? What language are you supposed to read it in? Arabic. They don't trust any translation at all. So if you were to convert, you're supposed to learn to read Arabic, and you're to pray in Arabic, because that's the language of God, which to me is a very strange way of viewing God, in that God has only one language. I think God is capable of speaking in every language. But anyway, we have some of that in Christianity too, where a certain version is the only one that is faithful. The Catholic Church for centuries put out their own version and then didn't want anybody to read it except for the priest. So we have some of those strange things. Now, the thing comes up to me that is worth thinking about is how did Muhammad, who couldn't read or write, how did he know about so many biblical characters? And it's clear that he's influenced by a certain form of Christianity and even some very misguided Jews. It's obvious from the information put together that he or the people that wrote his material down had access to. How did they know that? Well, I've already told you this. There's a large community of Jews in both Mecca and Medina. Muhammad was also a caravan leader. He's traveling all over the place. He's interacting. They don't sit down and watch TV at night at the hotel. They sit around the campfire. What do? They tell stories. They tell biblical stories. So a man that can't read or write can still pick up all sorts of information. There is one story about Ezra that came from a little radical offshoot group of the Jews that most of us know that Ezra had an important part to do with the restoration of the temple and the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem and all of that. What most of us don't know is that there was this strange little bizarre tale that was going around, at least in some of the offshoot groups of Jews, that Ezra was born back during the time of the Babylonian captivity, and he memorized the entire Old Testament, and then 300 years later he gets involved in restoring the temple and Judaism in Jerusalem, and he, having lived 300 years, some accounts even say that he died and he was brought back to life, gave them the Old Testament. So all the Old Testament was destroyed except for that which Ezra memorized. Now, is that in the Bible anywhere? Of course not. Where did Muhammad get such a story? By inspiration? No, he knew this little radical group of Jews that we know believed that. And they try to denounce Jesus being the Son of God because they say it doesn't mean what you Christians say that it means, because Ezra was called the Son of God. Where is Ezra called the Son of God? Nowhere except for in the writings of this little radical offshoot group that were heretics. And so the ideas about Christianity and Judaism that Muhammad has in that part of the world traveling around, most of them were misguided on their beliefs to begin with. And so the information that he is getting is not true Judaism nor true Christianity. And you see that reflected in his writings and in his teachings in the Hadith. Now, to simplify Islam, and that's what a lot of people want to do, they say it's very simple. You're supposed to, at one point, and I've heard this on the radio, which is strange sounding to me, but you'll hear more of it. All you have to do to become a Muslim is to, at one point, say with sincerity, in front of witnesses, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. You do that, you are an official Muslim. And I said, I've heard this on the radio. I've heard Muslim clerics on the radio getting people to call in, just like our friends, the Baptists, who say all you got to do is believe and say, I believe in Jesus, come into my heart, Lord Jesus. Boom, there you go, you're saved. I actually hear Muslims on the radio doing this now. Our world is changing, is it not? You're supposed to pray 5 times a day at least, and you've got to go through all this ceremony where you wash your hands, you wash your face, you wash your mouth, you wash your nose, you got to do all this to purify yourself, and then when you pray, you're supposed to kneel. Now listen, is there anything wrong with that? Absolutely 100% no. In fact, where did they learn the kneeling position of prayer? From the Christians and Jews that they encountered. Some of you know this. The root word for prayer in the Old Testament is what? To kiss the ground. So we ought to not make fun of them in any way for kneeling in the way that they do, because Christians and Jews in that part of the world have been doing it. That's where they got the idea from. I had a Muslim ask me not too awful long ago, why don't you people kneel? Christians in our area do. I guess we're too proud. Don't know any other answer. Because anybody that's done a study of the Word, and the word means to kiss the ground, you say, doesn't mean literally. Well, we kind of do with what we want on that stuff, don't we? Almsgiving, 2.5% of all your money is supposed to be given each year to distribute among those who are in need. I guess the class is over. You're supposed to fast during the month of Ramadan from daylight to dark. You're actually not even supposed to swallow your own saliva. And then at some point, you're supposed to go to Mecca. And if you can't afford that, you can go to a lesser place, but still supposed to be a holy place. And that's where we'll start next week. At some point, you're supposed to go to Mecca. And if you can't afford that, you can go to a lesser place, but still supposed to be a holy place.